All right, good morning, everybody. You can say hi afterwards, too. You don't have to get all your chit-chat out right now. You can visit after church this morning. As a matter of fact, I really recommend you do that. Hey, grab a seat as we get started this morning. First of all, I'm Dave. If you're new to Journey, I want to just say welcome. So excited you're here. Next few weeks, you're going to be finding out more about us because we're just entering a brand new series called FearLESS. And I'm excited about that. Not too often that I can remember that Halloween landed on Sunday, and we got to have this time to share. But I just thought it was an appropriate day to launch a series about fear and the things that we're facing in our world and our culture, and currently, just right now, even in our community. So I'm going to need the house lights all up this morning because I want to see, because some of you are afraid of the dark, and I just want to help you out there so we can there we go. And I want some participation this morning, talking about things that scare us. When you're little, how many of you are afraid of the dark, honestly? Anybody? Okay, maybe it wasn't the fear of the dark, but how many of you remember the man under the bed? And this is a real thing. I just want you to know that for me, at least, I was not concerned so much with the dark as much as I was the guy under the bed that shows up in the dark. And so you couldn't get on and off the bed without jumping far enough so he couldn't grab your legs. You didn't ever want your legs to go over the bed because he might grab them and pull you down. I don't know where that came from, but it was real, at my house at least. Those fears morph into other things later. We grow up with these kind of weird, bizarre things. Some people fear the closet not being closed at night because the bad guy in the closet's going to come out. Some people fear, how many of you fear spiders? Anybody snakes? All right. Anybody bad breath? Okay, whatever. We all have our fears. But let me ask you, what are you afraid of now? What are your fears now? Because mine kind of grew, and some of you are afraid of COVID. Some of you are afraid of, the fact that you're losing freedoms in our current culture, and that people will do anything not to feel fear, so they'll give up anything so they can feel safe, trust anyone with their own bodies, their lives. They'll trust other people just so they can feel secure. Some of us are afraid of what our children are having to experience in school these days as we learn some of the things that are frightful things that are happening in our schools, and some of the things that are being taught, some of the things that are being portrayed as real, some of the pre-sexualization that's taking place in our young children. Some of those things. We fear recession. We fear our paycheck's not going to be enough. We fear our security's just kind of leaking away. We fear what's happening at our border. We fear what's happening in Afghanistan, or what happened there and is still happening to folks that we know or people that left behind. We fear, man, you go on. You may fear that better-looking, smarter, younger person at work. Your fear may be the wrinkles and things that are showing up on your face, the saggy parts. You may fear that lump that you've just discovered. You may just be terrified of death. And to be honest, and I'm going to be today, because I just don't know any better way to be. I've been on a journey where, honestly, most of my life, I was one of those kids that didn't have a lot of the probably good natural fears. I wasn't afraid of much. And so, just being in a household full of boys, we just did a lot of things that were probably not smart. Jumping off, your roof with an umbrella, trying to be like, Mary Poppins. We literally did that. It hurt real bad, but I learned pretty quick, umbrellas don't really float you like they show in the movie. There are a lot of things we do as a result of not having appropriate fear. Fear can be a good thing. Fear teaches us things, but there are fears that literally rip the heart of our lives out. They rip our joy. They create limits on our life and our happiness and our success. And fear can be a devastating thing. And some of you are crippled by it. Some folks today who are in good health and could otherwise be here are still afraid. And I'm not saying that that's not a valid thing for some people you have to know your own life and your own health situation. But some folks are still afraid to come back to a physical meeting, not afraid of Walmart, but they're afraid of church. It always puzzles me. Not afraid of big sport events, but they're afraid of church. Just saying, if you're watching today, and some of those are you know your fears. The thing is, we fear different things. And to be honest, when I came through some of the last couple years of some of the life-threatening situations I faced, I learned some of the things I feared that I didn't think I feared. I always thought I was a pretty fearless guy. The one thing that I always say, and it's kind of like, to be honest, it's one of those humble, cocky things, You're trying to be humble, but you're really not. All I fear is failure. Really? Well, I'll tell you what I really fear, and I found out more so when I was really sick, and I realized that some of my dreams may be cut short because my life was in jeopardy. I realized that I fear people. Not that I'm afraid you're going to attack me, but I'm afraid of what you think of me. I fear what people think because I fear failure. Why do I fear failure? Because I fear you're going to think I'm not any good. I fear you're going to find out one day that his preaching is really bad. You're going to find out one day that there's a whole lot better church down the street, and there's a better option, or there's a better thing, or he's not that smart, he's not that good, he's not that spiritual, or whatever. He doesn't know a whole lot more than I do. I fear a whole lot of things that really I wasn't really honest about before. I fear that things right now, like with COVID, some of the fears that I've come to just deal with is that church will never return to normal. I was reading this week that 1 out of 5 churches, according to Gallup survey, will never recover from what happened over the COVID situation. I read all about these terrible things that are happening. Churches can't financially stay solvent because, the giving has gone down, and, people's they're just taking their fear and their money elsewhere and all these kind of things. And we're only a voluntary giving kind of environment. So if people don't give, we don't pay the bills, and that's how it works. And vision doesn't go forward. So we fear those things. As pastors, we deal with fears just like anybody else in a family. Your family has struggles things you have to deal with, so do churches. And this is a big family, only it's a voluntary family. You don't have to sign up for this one. The other one you didn't get to pick. I have the fears that I'm beginning to realize have limited a lot of my life, have limited some of the ways that I've been willing to present myself on stage, because I want to form an image that will be acceptable for people, that they're going to feel like, oh, I can trust that guy. And at times, it's caused me to back away from things that I really wanted to pursue, or speak about topics that, maybe a little bit scary or whatever, or that I'm not certain about. And I'm just be honest with you, I'm facing a lot of my fears now. And I'm finding out when you come closer to your demise, or at least you stare at a potential death-bringing situation, you kind of look at things a little differently. And I'm learning that what I fear more than anything is not hearing God say, well done. I fear that I live my life for an audience of people rather than an audience of one, and that I've made the greatest mistake in putting the priority there. And I'm addressing that. And I'm going to just ask you, what do you fear? If it were really just on the big screen today, your greatest fear, what would it be? Fear that he'll find out about that thing you did, or she'll find out about the truth, or that somebody will learn, that your kids will know who you really are, or about your past, or this. What do you fear? That something at work will be discovered, that something will happen, that you'll lose your job. What are you afraid of? And the reality is, in our world right now, you can open any newspaper, and they are literally selling fear. They're selling it, and it sells. Friends, fear sells. It's the most popular thing. If we can create this atmosphere of crisis and danger, and this sense of that life is not safe and things are scary, but if you come to us, we'll tell you the information. We'll literally cull all the truth and give it to you in bite-sized pieces. And that's what the media would love to do. That's what our social media, that's what our news press, that's what the news snippets are all about. They want to give you the truth. They want to feed you the line. They want to sell you the fear. And I'm just going to tell you, we need a new source of our information. What do we typically do when we are afraid? Well, we develop investment plans, better ones. We get better security systems. Walk in Costco or anywhere, you just right in the front entrance, all the camera systems and the alarms and all that. We get it. We ask for a bigger military. We buy mood-altering drugs. What do? And it's not only for grown-ups. Grown-ups aren't the only ones that try to navigate our fears with all these things. I just read this week that the average child today has the same level of anxiety as the average psychiatric patient in the 50s. that our children are living with a level of anxiety and fear that's never been heard of before. Fear. You know what fear is? Fear is like the big bully that you see in the school hallway that tries to intimidate you, tries to crush you, tries to make you move over, to hand over, to basically lay over and let them have their way. Fear is something that basically, when you think about it, it wants to hurt us, intimidate us, suppress us. Fear is a bully that basically moves out of the hallway and into your heart and into your mind. And he doesn't just live at the school, he comes home with you. And he keeps you from your dreams. He keeps you from great relationships. Have you ever known fear and happiness to exist side by side, happily together? Can peace and fear live together in your heart? How about joy? Can you be confident and fearful, joyful and fearful? I don't think so. Wouldn't it be great if we could knock the stuffing right out of our fears, the big bullies that live in our hearts and our lives and our minds? That's what the series is about. And imagine your life without anxiety. Imagine just waking up one day and not having that sense of, yuck, or oh no, or weariness over all the anxiety that you face. If fear wasn't your default response to something, but faith was, trust was, confidence was, what would that feel like? To live without fear, without the rejection or pain. The truth is, your fears currently establish the limits of your lives. Your fears are literally dictating the limits of your lives. Author and pastor Max Lucado wrote a great book that talked a lot about this, and he said this. He said, fear never wrote a symphony or a poem, never negotiated a peace treaty or cured a disease. Fear never pulled a family out of poverty or a country out of bigotry. Fear never saved a marriage or a business. Courage did that. Faith did that. But fear herds us into a prison and slams the door. Wouldn't it be great to walk out? Wouldn't it be great just to walk out? Fear establishes boundaries and limits on us. It's like that iron lid that tells us how high we can go. It tells us how deep our relationships will be and personal successes and finances and all these things. There's a life inside every one of us that we dream of, that God has actually put there. There's a yearning inside of us for greatness and significance, if not just joy and confidence and contentment. But we'll remain elusive if we continue to live under the power of fear. I remember when we were kids, one of the things that happened when we were just elementary and junior high kids is in elementary school, we moved to this house that had an alley behind it. And in that in that community, in the little farming community that we lived in, this alleyway was like, this great mysterious place that we got to just explore and go down and peek into other people's yards and sort through their trash. Found all kinds of treasures, by the way. We learned that this was our little fortress. And what we did is we went out to construction sites and found all kinds of great materials that they left behind at night. And we borrowed them. Okay, we found I'm sure they weren't using them. I'm sure that was leftover and scrap. But we literally got our little wagon, tied it to our bicycles, and we would go take trip after trip after trip to the construction sites to bring home the supplies. And friends, we had the coolest fort you can imagine. We literally, I'm not kidding, our fence was only like, the regular, like a 6-foot fence, but because of the wealth of our discovery, our scavenging abilities, we were able to literally put a parapet, like a walkway all along, and we extended our fence another 3 feet so that we could walk along our whole fence along the back and observe our kingdom. And we could literally look down on the people, the little kids riding their bicycles in the alley and scoff. We were above them. Not only that, but should war break out, we had more fruit trees than anybody I can imagine. We had apple, we had orange, we had tangerine, we had lemon. And friends, a rotten apple is an amazing piece of ammo. Just so you know. The neighbor next door, there were kids across the alley who basically discovered poorly, in a very painful way, what a rotten apple smells like when it hits you in the head. There were people next to us that they knew better than to cross us, because my brothers and I and our cousins, we dominated that alley. We had tunnels that went between all the trees. We literally had little rooms that you would go into that were all wooden and carpeted, and we had little secret places where we kept our stash of rotting fruit. We owned our little kingdom. That was a safe place. That was our fortress. And because of our fence, and because of our high parapet and our walls, because we kept that controlled in there, that felt like our kingdom. Outside, we had little control. Inside our fence was the known. Outside the fence was the unknown. Inside was predictable. Outside, unpredictable. Inside, we were safe, relatively. Outside, there was danger. But let's talk about your life. You have the same kind of thing taking place in your life, where you have constructed for yourself a world of security. Most of us have constructed an area of our lives that feels pretty safe. I mean, we've made this space. We've created something like a fenced yard. And it's to a high degree, things are pretty predictable and known in our prepared world. We have certain relationships that we keep inside of the fence, and those people are the people that are safe. And the circle gets smaller and smaller as people get weirder and weirder. And the world, just as the older we get, the more we realize everybody's weird. Trust no one. There are certain environments we've created that we feel safe, where we spend time in those environments regularly, certain patterns that we follow, certain activities that we participate in, that is our world, that is our safe place. Your routine is very much that backyard. Your relational world is very much your backyard. Your patterns of life and activity are very much your backyard. Then there's the other stuff. The stuff that exists outside the fence. There are relationship environments. There are activities you don't feel you have control over. There are less predictable, less known things, less safe places. And we feel if we can just build high enough walls and protect our hearts and our lives and our families and our finances and all those things enough, even our faith becomes like a little fortress place where we keep it safe and protected from all those horrible other belief systems and out there. And the problem is, what I've discovered, have the highest fences you can dream of, the biggest fortress you can erect, and trouble will still find a way in. Here's what I discovered, because we had a next-door neighbor who was Big Bad Bully Brett. Say that 3 times fast. Big Bad Bully Brett, he was a brat. He was a punk. He was that guy. But he was big, and he was older, and he didn't think that our fort was so cool that we could hide behind it. So when he would taunt us from our wall and our surrounded, safe place, we would say things back, and words became stronger and soon followed with fruit. And so one day I discovered, friends, even if we stay inside our well-kept castle, danger finds a way in. Because I threw something at Brett. He was saying some really awful things and throwing things at me, so I chucked the fruit at him, and I nailed him. And I got pretty good at that, I must say. And I nailed him, and so what happened next shocked me. He broke all protocol of neighborliness, and he came in my yard. He literally came through the gate. And I'm like, that cannot happen. You cannot cross. That's our space. This is my kingdom. And he not only did he come in, but he came in with an eye, just his eyes were glaring red, and he was boiling and screaming and saying words that we didn't hear in Sunday school. And I took off running into the garage. My brothers had already seen him coming and split. It was just me and him. And he was literally easily 2 feet taller than me and about 75 pounds bigger. And the next thing I know is I'm running into my garage, and they've closed the door and locked it, and I can't get in. And so I'm just running. I'm looked like this, like a scared animal. And he picks up. This time he didn't bring fruit. He didn't bring fruit to the party. He brought a rock. And this rock had like stone, concrete in it. And as I saw him wind up, I tried to dodge, turned, and sure enough, he hit me square right between the shoulder blades and knocked the wind out of me. As I'm laying on the floor crying, he laughs and walks out of my kingdom, the victor. And I just say, friends, the problem is, if we always live within our fences, we're going to realize that the trouble doesn't stay outside just because there's a wall. We have built it safe and secure, but it comes anyway. Trouble finds a way in. And trouble may be big, bad Brett that's just going to come and bully you. Or it may be something even worse. It may be a child that gets hooked on something. It may be a spouse who finds interest in something else, someone else. It may be a habit that gets deep control of us. It may be poor spending habits or too few things or an illness or something else that takes away our security. It knocks our walls down. So the problem is, trouble finds a way in, but the second trouble is this: if we always live in those fences, we limit our life. We limit our joy. We limit our experience. We limit our exposure. We limit what we get to experience as apprentices of Jesus who are meant to go into the world and bring good news to the lost and broken. We limit what we can find in the end of our days when we look back, those moments where we feel like that's where I truly live. We limit those experiences. So let's talk about for a moment just where do the fences come from? What exactly is this I've constructed? Our brains, they're powerful, they're complex. They're basically designed to keep us safe. And there's an area of our brain, and we'll get into the complicated terms for it, but basically we'll call it the safety center. And the way the safety center works is this. In your mind, and it's been working since you've been born, there's an area that basically is running these incredibly complex log and catalog systems. And what it does, when you're little and you touch the hot stove, your brain logs, the pain receptors tell it, that hurt. And immediately in that safety center, it logs the experience. Some kids, it takes more logging than others. Something inside your brain says, danger. Don't go near that. Don't touch that. Now, what happens over time, of course, that your safety center adds more and more and more and more things to that category. And it continues to store up. Information begins to grow and expand. And eventually, you get this vague sense in your mind that everything out there can be dangerous. That if something is unfamiliar, it can't be trusted. That you have to be wary and watchful of everything. For good reason. Sometimes really, really bad things can come in and it looks pretty good at first, and then it turns itself over and we see the reality of it. The reality is every time I get to the edge of the familiar, every time I get to the edge of the unknown, every time I get to something that I'm not certain about, my mind sends a little warning signal that tells me, danger. If I'm too close, I'll get burned. If I let them in, I'll get hurt. So while the safety center keeps me safe, it also keeps opportunities at bay. And I never grow if I live cloistered in my castle. So the question becomes, how do I respond? What do I do about this? Major opportunity in two ways. Most of us respond in two ways. First, there are the people who they choose to live inside the fence. They just get comfortable in there, and they just make it padded and comfortable as possible, where you control the variables. Inside you feel safe, so you keep safe environments, safe activities, safe relationships, which leads to mediocrity, and yet you're okay because it's safe. The problem is every fence in our life becomes a limit that holds us back. Friends, if you're single and you've been hurt by a relationship, and you feel like the worst thing that happened was when you opened your heart to somebody, what you're going to do is you're going to tend to close your heart in relationship. And you're going to probably find safety in people you don't respect. Because if you try to date or find somebody you truly have incredible respect and awe in, you may be hurt when they disappoint you, when you learn who they really are. So you never really let your heart out. You never let your guard down. You never really trust the right people. Maybe in business or career you had a dream, you had just this vision that you could do something with your life, that God has gifted you in certain ways. You feel inclined towards certain abilities, but your fear has told you to not risk it. And so you stay tightly wound in your little cocoon. He's equipped you, and he's even prompted you at times to get out, try something, experience, risk something, but you can't because you're living in the safety of your kingdom. You can't control what happens out there. That's one group of people. They decide to live in there and pad it safely. Another group of people, and this option, it's to embrace risk and run right through the fences. Now, this is a smaller group of people because usually they're dead by 15 or 16. These are the people that say, what fence? And they just dive headfirst into whatever. They don't fear most things. They don't have that sense of this could be dangerous. And there aren't as many of them around, but they enjoy risk. It's like a drug to them. It's not always safe to be close to them, but these people know adventure. And there's kind of this life over the edge kind of mentality about them. And my opinion is we can often find ourselves in one or the other. And if you're a person that takes life cautiously or prefer to be in controlled environments, or if you're a person who loves to fling yourself to whatever, I understand you. I live sometimes in both of those. How many of you would say, if you were to be honest, that you're the safety kind of person, you'd rather just keep your world as tight and controlled as possible? Anybody want to own that? Anybody want to say, I'm clearly not that person. I clearly just don't know when to stop myself. I don't know when to close my mouth or to not do things. Okay. Not that either one is necessarily right or wrong. It's not a right or wrong. It's just two different approaches, generally by personality or whatever. But I think there's a better approach. I think there's a biblical approach. I think there's a healthier approach for how to manage our fear, how to face the difficulties, how to step through those challenges. And this is what I want to do. Matthew chapter 8 is our text today, and I'm going to spend the bulk of our time here just unpacking a situation where Jesus led his apprentices through their fear. So Jesus had been telling people that to follow him would make them less secure. Believe that or not, that happened to be a selling point of his ministry. Come follow me. You're going to have to take up a cross. You're going to have to die to a bunch of stuff, but you're going to find life and life to the full. I mean, that's an interesting strategy. I think his PR person was a little off. You know, they could have helped him a little bit on this. He could have framed his little online presence better. But Jesus basically just came out and said, hey, life hurts. Life is full of pain. You're going to face it one way or another. Follow me, and your pain will have meaning. I'll show you why, and I'll show you how, and I'll show you that there's something on the other side. And so Jesus comes to a moment, a situation in Matthew chapter 8 where he leads his disciples into an experience where he gets to watch firsthand what they do with it. Here's how one of them remembered. His name was Matthew. He said in Matthew chapter 8:23, Jesus got into a boat and his followers went with him. A great storm arose on the lake so that the waves covered the boat. Now these are Matthew's words. He will never forget the night or the day he almost drowned. Can you remember an experience like that? I can. I'll never forget the little rafting trip we took down a canal when we got stuck in one of those weir gates and just almost, a whole bunch of us almost drowned. Never forget it. He's recalling an experience, friends, that was so close to death for him. His fear was so real that it imprinted like most things do at that moment. And so when he's writing about it, he's grabbing his Greek lexicon. He's looking for the right word to talk about, okay, drenched, soaked, storm, danger. He's looking for all these things. And you know the word he comes with? Downpour. None of them seem to be good enough, powerful enough, scary enough. So he grabs this word that fits best, seismos in the Greek. And it means a quake, a trembling eruption of sea and sky. A trembling eruption of sea and sky. Ever been on big waters when they got like white caps, boats getting tossed? This was his moment. This term, he wrote, a great seismos arose on the lake. The term still lives in our modern language. A seismologist is a person who studies earthquakes. A seismograph measures the depth and power of a quake. Matthew, along with the rest of Jesus' apprentices, lived through a seismos, and they never forgot it. It shook them. Now think about it. Matthew only used this word seismos 2 other times. He used it first at Jesus' death when the earth shook. And literally the world, it's like the sun grew dark and the earth shook. It was a seismos moment. He used it one other time. It was at the resurrection of Jesus when the stone was rolled away. It said the earth shook, the world just quivered, and graves burst open as Jesus was raised from the dead. And this is, it's like the trilogy of great earth-shaking moments in his life, where Jesus' death, Jesus' resurrection, and the storm on the lake. I find that very interesting. You only use that two other times. Sudden fear. We find that it was a sudden fear. It wasn't one of those, because sometimes, storms grow gradually in our lives. This storm came out of nowhere. Just like Chase's experience going home from the party Friday night when his tire blew on the freeway. Tyler experienced that a couple weeks. I don't know what it is with tires in us. Had good tread and everything. Just boom, Those moments when, boom, out of nowhere, going home, something changed, something blows. This storm blew. It blew in. And this Peter, Andrew, James, John, these were all fishermen. Out of all Jesus' apprentices, he picked 4 of them that were sailors, used to the high seas, used to the storms, used to all of this stuff. But then there's city boy Matthew, the tax collector. What some would call, the turncoat. City boy panicked and literally held on for his life. Can you feel his surprise? He linked these 2 phrases together. He said, Jesus and his followers got in a boat, and he links it with, a great storm arose on the lake. Man, wouldn't you think that if you were talking about the first, it would end with a better second sentence? Wouldn't you think that if it would go a happy story or a Christian story or the way God normally works, wouldn't it say something like Jesus and his followers got in a boat and suddenly a rainbow appeared in the sky? Geese formed into the shape of a cross and just glided overhead. The glassy sea reflected a gorgeous sunset as Jesus said, "Peace on my children." Wouldn't you expect something different than Jesus led his disciples into a boat and they ran into a storm? They just about died. How many of you Christians have been sold on the idea that when you come to God, everything's going to get better and easier? When you discovered that the storms still come, you got rocked. A story, not so subtle, not so popular reminder is telling us that when we follow Jesus, we're still going to get soaked. As a matter of fact, we're going to face some really high seas and high winds. John reminds us of that in his gospel. He says, here on earth, you will have many, many trials and sorrows. He didn't say you might, you may, or you could have. He said, you will have many trials and sorrows. Christ's followers get COVID. Some Christ followers bury a child, have to let go of a spouse way too early, battle addictions, face their fears. But one key point of the story is this: the difference between apprentices to Jesus and everyone else is not the absence of storms. It's who we turn to in our storms. It's the power he gives us to face them and the lives we live after we've lived it with him. And the first thing to deal with is this reality of Jesus was sleeping. Now, we just got to stop and we got to just recognize this. The next verse in there says Jesus was sleeping. Now, there's a scene, all right? The disciples, this is Max Lucado again. He said, now there's a scene. The disciples scream, Jesus dreams, thunder roars, Jesus snores. He doesn't doze, catnap, or rest. He slumbers. Who could sleep at a time like this? Could you? Could you snooze during a roller coaster loop-de-loop? In a wind tunnel? At a kettle drum concert? But Jesus slept through all 3 at once. This is a shocking bit of scripture. Mark's gospel, he tells the story, he adds a couple little other descriptors. He says 2 curious details in verse 38 of Mark 4. He says, Jesus was in the stern asleep on a pillow. Now, first century fishermen, their boats weren't massive, they weren't huge, but they had these large, heavy nets. And they would have a place in the stern of the boat, just in the rear of the boat, there was like a little compartment where they kept all of their fishing gear. And the small compartment at the back of the boat was enclosed and protected. It was the only part of the boat that was. That's where they kept their tackle. That's where they kept their nets. So Jesus, being exhausted from whatever the day brought in ministry, finds himself a nice, cozy little place while they're crossing the lake, which to us would be more like a sea. And he climbs down into this little nested pocket fish storage tackle area. And basically, Jesus rested his head, not on some big, he didn't bring his, his sleep perfect pillow or whatever those are. He basically comes down there, and what most scholars suggest is that it was probably one of the weighted sandbags. They're like these 100-pound leather bags that they use as a ballast to keep the boat from tipping over. They just place them to balance the load so that the boat doesn't tip over when they get new fish on or other things. So wherever that bag was placed at the moment in that hold, Jesus found it and fell asleep on it. Now that is a picture. Mediterranean fishermen with all their gear, and Jesus is laying down there asleep. I don't think Jesus basically nodded off accidentally. I don't think this was just an accident. I think Jesus went down there and slept on purpose. I think Jesus was fully aware that the storm would brew. I think Jesus knew it was coming. I think he did this as a lesson. Jesus takes his disciples through things to help us experience the realities of the kingdom. Jesus takes us into scary moments, into uncontrolled stuff outside of our fence, outside of our comfort zone. He draws us out of our kingdoms of safety to trust him with our lives, and sometimes it's scary and messy, and sometimes it feels like we're going to drown. But he wants to teach us the power of a relationship centered on him. Jesus' nap it really messed with the disciples. Matthew and Mark both record their responses with 3 rapid-fire little Greek imperatives or commands. And then a question. It says the commands were, Lord, save, drowning. Those were the imperatives. And then there was a question, Rabbi, don't you care we're dying? Don't you care we're perishing? Don't you care we're drowning? It's interesting that Jesus' apprentices aren't interested in his strength or in his knowledge or his experience. They don't ask, can you stop the storm? Are you aware of the storm? Do you have any experience with storms? They go straight to the heart of the issue. Don't you care about us? Don't you love us? And that's what fear does. It makes us doubt what we know to be true. A couple powerful truths about fear. First, fear erodes our confidence in God's goodness. We begin to wonder, if God loves us, if God's in heaven, is he asleep in my storm? Does God really give a rip? Am I not the kind of child that he cares enough about? Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I screwed up too much. Maybe my sins have limited his love for me, his capacity to reach me, maybe whatever. Do you ever wonder about God's character because of your current crisis? Does fear ever rob you of your confidence in God's goodness? It erodes our confidence. Secondly, fear turns us into control freaks. Fear will turn you into a control freak because, man, it's like, do something about the storm. God, fix it or else. And fear is at the center of this perceived loss of control. When you lose control, what do people normally do? When they lose control in their family life, in their children's lives, what do? You're grounded. You're acting up. Stay home. You don't get to go anywhere. No phone, no anything. We limit, we control, we grip when it's our spouse or somebody else. Don't you ever talk to them again. Don't you see them. Don't you do this. We control. We try to balance the loss of control with greater control. Fear unleashes storms of doubt. That's why it turns us into control freaks. Jesus, do something about this storm or else I'm out. When life spins out of control, we face unexpected stuff. We grab for stuff we can control. And it can be our housekeeping. It can be our diet, our body. It can be the person next to us, whatever we grab for what we think we can control. Third, fear dulls our memory. It makes us forget. The disciples had reason to trust Jesus. Man, by now in chapter 4, it tells us that all kinds of sicknesses and diseases were healed among the people. He cast out spirits with a word. He healed all who were sick. Jesus had been doing this for chapters. They'd experienced all these miraculous things nobody had ever done. Shouldn't somebody remember Jesus' track record up to this point? Shouldn't somebody call out and say, hey, we're good. Jesus is on board. Wake them up. Yeah, but man, we're okay. It dulls our memory. And the final thing is fear fills us with dread. It just makes us sick inside. It just takes away all of our joy. When we give fear a space in our hearts, safety becomes our God. When safety becomes our God, we worship a risk-free life. That's what I'm watching right now. And again, not meant to be a criticism of people who, choose to move in a certain direction or not for their own safety. I think that's wisdom. You do what you think is best. But I think it's interesting how quickly we'll give up our freedoms when we're in fear. How quickly we'll surrender power to somebody else to make ultimate decisions about our lives when we're afraid. I just think that sometimes safety becomes our God and we can worship a risk-free life. Not that we should be stupid about anything. Be wise, be caring, be cautious, be wise as serpents, innocent as doves. But just ask yourself, who am I trusting in this? This government authority, this person who is an expert, or that God's going to take care of me if I do all the wise things I know to do and trust him? That's the problem. Safety lovers rarely do anything great. Fear-filled people cannot love deeply because love is risky. Fear-filled people cannot give generously because it's often not returned. Fear-filled people don't dream wildly because dreams have to happen outside my safety net. And that's where Jesus comes to wage war on fear. What do we do when we're afraid? What do we do when this storm comes to visit us and it moves in to visit? Mark tells us, when it appears that God is sleeping or has gotten distracted and that he isn't with us, realize it's a training opportunity for faith. Realize that it's an experience to teach you the greatness and the goodness of God. Realize that it's helpful if you, as an apprentice of Jesus, see that moment as this is class. You are in the instructor's care. He's showing you something. He's teaching you something. When we trust him without seeing, he shows up and shows faith to us. I believe that we're really inwardly fashioned for faith, not fear. But we've gotten so used to panicking. God wants us to learn how to live beyond our fears. How? A couple things before we close. And by the way, that's what the rest of the series is about. So you'll need to come back to get the rest of this. We need more time to go in depth. But seriously, I want to just give you just a couple takeaways. Also, I've got a little homework for you. Matthew 6, 25 through 34. If you want to write that down, Matthew 6, 25 through 34, I want you to read that. I want you just to learn that. I want you to immerse yourself in that, where Jesus talks about our lives and the fear and the worry that we live with and trust. Matthew 6, 25 through 34. And just from now to next Sunday, just daily, just go through that. Get it inside of you. Memorize it if you can. But as we close, I want to finish the passage with a couple observations. First, Matthew 8, 26 and 27. Jesus responded. Okay, so here we have the storm. They go and they wake him up. Jesus responded, "Why are you afraid?" I mean, is that a silly question? You literally see the water is coming in. It's probably going down there and soaking him. He's in the lowest part of the boat. So why would he have to ask, "Why are you afraid?" Why would Jesus need to remind them that they're afraid when it's obvious why they're afraid? Does Jesus ever come to you and just kind of nudged you in a moment and said, "What are you afraid of?" I don't think the fact is that he's wanting you to point out the problem that you're in. I think his deeper question is, what's going on in your heart? What do you rely on? What is the ultimate reality that you're living? What is the story that you believe you are in? Is it that the world is spinning wildly? It was chaotically created by an accident that followed by 6 trillion other accidents that ultimately led to your reality as a human living and walking as a biped on this earth? Is that the story you're in? If that's the story you're in, then all the fear is warranted and go ahead and build bigger fences. If the story you're in, there was a God who was crazy about a creation he made that walked away from him in fear and self-focus, that relationship was severed, but that God has redeemed that opportunity. He has introduced a way for people to be back in relationship with him, to walk with their Creator now and forever through Jesus. If you believe that the story you're in is an invitation for you to walk with your Creator, to trust him, to follow the way that he gives you that is the best possible life, if you believe that's the story you're in, then the question is really important. Why are you afraid? Don't you believe, don't you know that God has a plan for your life? That every single day of your life is ordered of the Lord. And he knew every single one of them before they came to pass, that God has a plan for you. Don't you know? Why do you have so little faith? He goes, you have so little faith. Then he got up and he rebuked the wind and the waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. Suddenly. Just like that. Just like the tire that blew. Just suddenly. God has a grip on the world around us. Situation is righted. The disciples were amazed. Who is this man? They asked. Even the winds and the waves obey him. Friends, that is the question you need to be asking yourself. Who is this man to me? Not what does church say, what does religion say, what did my parents say, what the preacher says, but what have you experienced this man to be? Who is Jesus to you? What is the reality that you're living out of look like, feel like, experience? What is it to you when you go through the storm? Who is this man? Who is this man? Storms are going to blow through your life, but when you're following Jesus, the storms become a classroom for growing our faith and witnessing God's power. When we truly trust him and we follow him, even in the storm, God demonstrates power in our lives. God points us to greater realities beyond the moment. He shows up when we think we're goners. He leads us to the next level of our experience and trust. No matter what comes next, he promises to be with us. Friend, as I came back from some of the experiences from my past season, and I come back and I realize that things are not the same in a church that we lead, man, panic and fear began to set in. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this? Friends, I'm facing a whole new reality as God has invited me back into the experience of who is this man? Who is Jesus to you, Pastor Dave? Who is Jesus? Who are you listening to? Who are you following? Who are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? The two questions Jesus asked that are so powerful are the two questions that are found in this text. One of them, why are you afraid? And the other one, who is this man? Are the realities I want us to unpack as we face the fears and we learn to be fearless in the next few weeks. When God allows fears to rise, it's like a storm and he has the power to calm it. When God calls us to face our fears, he can control what we cannot. When Jesus invites us to become his apprentice, it's an invitation to the greatest adventure of your life. Friends, I wouldn't want you to miss it. And as we get really honest about what we're afraid of, and as we turn to Christ, and as we sort through the baggage of our own life, and we look in the storehold of where we think our security lies and our capacity to earn the nets. I just find it very interesting. He was in with the nets. Their capacity to earn the security of their lives was fastened in that little hold, and Jesus was there just laying on it, resting. It's like, hey, this is what you're looking for? It's not going to help. I'm the one. You want to look to your bank account? Can't trust it. You want to look to your strength? Fight the wind. You want to look to your capacity? You want to look to your control? You want to look to something else? All of it's a dead end. What you need to look to is, who is this man? What does he say? What is his word for me right now? Peace. Be still. What are you going through right now that you need to just open it up to God and say, okay, here's the storm. Here it is. It's this health thing. It's this financial thing. It's this whatever thing, political thing. It's whatever. Are you willing to open up the hold of your life and show, this is what here's the nets, here's the gear and the tackle and the stuff I've accumulated. I'm trusting this. Do you want to just open your heart and say, God, this morning I realize none of that's safe. I tried to build a big wall around my little castle, but it is not safe. I want to invite you in. I want to trust you today. Let's pray as we close. Father, as we wrap up today, I'm just so keenly aware of the struggles of my life and the fears that I've had to face over the last few years. And more than ever, the reality that I can't control anything. There's a few things I can do, and I need to live with wisdom and proper boundaries. But God, the reality is you're teaching me something so much greater than to fear the storm. You're teaching me who you are. You're teaching me what it looks like to be led by the master of creation, the maker of the wind and waves. And it's you teaching me that I can trust you no matter what. And that I can come right now in the midst of anything I'm facing, grab hold of your hand and watch you lead me through. God, right now in this room, there are people who are facing all kinds of stuff, things that I just can't even imagine, and the fears are real. And God, I just pray that you would take their hand, still their anxiety, and restore their peace. Bring them to a sense of awareness that you are in the storm with them and you have not forgotten them. You're allowing them to figure out where their trust lies so that then they can turn to you, to call on you, to trust in you. And God, that's what we do today. Lead us, we pray, as we continue to worship in Jesus' name. Amen. Friends, take a moment as we worship today. Just give your hearts a chance to respond. Just let this moment sink in that God is trying to get your attention towards what is going on that you trust, and where are your fears, and will you really follow me in and through these. Let's stand this morning. Let's worship together as we prepare to go.